The rain had been falling for hours, coating the empty two-lane highway in a slick black sheen. Daniel Holt gripped the steering wheel of his old Chevy, the wipers struggling against the downpour. It was past midnight, somewhere on Route 19 in rural West Virginia, miles from the nearest town. The GPS had cut out 30 minutes ago, and the only light came from his high beams and the dim red glow of the dashboard. He hadn't seen another car in over an hour, until he saw her. She stood at the edge of the road, drenched, hair plastered to her pale face, wearing a faded white dress that clung to her thin frame. One arm hung limply at her side, the other was raised in a slow, almost hesitant wave. Daniel slowed, tires hissing on wet asphalt. She didn't move toward him, didn't step back, just watched as he rolled to a stop. The rain made her face hard to see clearly, but something about her expression froze him. It wasn't desperation, like you'd expect from someone stranded. It was expectancy. The door unlocked with a metallic click. "You need a ride?" He called through the half-open window. She nodded once, slowly. Daniel leaned over and pushed the passenger door open. The smell of wet earth and something faintly metallic filled the cab as she slid in without a word. Her bare feet left dark, muddy streaks on the rubber mat. She clasped her hands in her lap, fingers trembling slightly. Daniel glanced at her again and saw her lips were pale blue. "Where you headed?" he asked. Her voice was barely above the rain's hiss. "Home." "Where's that?" A pause. "Just keep driving." Something about the way she said it made the fine hairs on his arm stand up. He glanced at the speedometer, 35 miles, and pressed the gas. They drove in silence for several miles, the road winding through dense black forest. Every so often, Daniel caught her reflection in the windshield. Her head turned toward him, though her eyes were shadowed, unreadable. When he tried to make small talk, asking her name, where she'd been, she said nothing. Only her hands moved, slowly rubbing together like she was cold. Finally, she whispered, "You passed it." Daniel jerked his head around. "Past what?" "Home." "I didn't see—" "Turn around," she said, sharper this time. Against his better judgment, he slowed and made a U-turn, the Chevy's tires splashing through puddles. She pointed down a narrow gravel lane barely visible in the dark. The rain seemed heavier here, the trees leaning in on both sides like they were listening. At the end of the lane stood a small sagging house, its windows dark, its front porch leaning to one side. "You live here?" Daniel asked. She nodded. He stopped in front. The rain was deafening now, drumming against the roof. She didn't move to get out. "You want me to walk you to the door?" Her head tilted slightly. "Would you?" Something in his gut screamed no, but her voice, so small, pushed him to nod. They stepped out into the downpour, his shoes sinking into soft mud. She led him up the creaking porch steps. The door was ajar, swinging gently. Inside was pitch black. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of mold and rust. Daniel pulled out his phone and switched on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing. No furniture, no pictures on the walls, just empty rooms with peeling wallpaper. The girl had vanished. "Hello?" he called, his voice echoing in the hollow space. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard groaned. Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears. He climbed the staircase, each step whining under his weight. The upper hall was colder, his breath misting in the air. At the far end was a door, half open. He pushed it wider. On the floor lay a soaked white dress, crumpled in a heap. Beside it, muddy footprints, small, bare, led to the corner, where they abruptly stopped. Daniel's phone flickered and went dark. In the silence, a voice whispered behind him, wet, cold breath brushing his ear. "You brought me home." He spun around, but there was nothing, only the open doorway and the dark hall beyond. Then from downstairs, the front door slammed. When he ran down, the porch was empty. His truck was gone. The rain had stopped. But in the distance on the long, empty road, his headlights glowed. moving away, as if driven by someone else. And standing in the beam, just before they vanished around the bend, was the girl. She waved. Once. Slowly. The rain was the kind that blurred the edges of the world. Heavy, unrelenting, it poured down the windshield in sheets, making the night ahead of me a warped, shifting smear of black and silver. The wipers thumped back and forth like a tired heartbeat, barely keeping up. I'd been on the road for 7 hours straight, my hands stiff around the wheel, the heater blowing lukewarm air. It was nearly midnight on Route 50 in Nevada, a stretch they call the loneliest road in America. They weren't kidding. I hadn't seen a gas station, diner, or even another car in almost an hour. Out here, the desert was just endless black void under the storm, broken only by the sharp flash of lightning far on the horizon. I was heading to Ely, where my sister lived, making a surprise visit for her birthday. I'd told her I'd be coming tomorrow, but I'd left earlier than planned. I didn't want to stay in any of the roadside motels I'd passed. They looked like they'd been closed for decades, their signs dangling crookedly in the wind. I was halfway through humming to myself to fight the drowsiness when I saw it. A figure. At first I thought it was a road sign, the way the rain distorted everything. But as my headlights swept closer, I saw her, standing at the shoulder, one hand lifted halfway, the other clutching something to her chest. She was drenched, her hair plastered to her head, and she wore a pale, long dress that looked far too thin for this kind of weather. I slowed automatically. Something about her stillness made my stomach tighten. She didn't step forward or wave frantically like you'd expect from someone stranded in the middle of nowhere. She just stood there watching me approach. The road was too narrow to stop without pulling over into the muddy shoulder. My tires crunched gravel as I rolled to a halt a few feet ahead of her. The rain roared against the roof. I reached over, popped the passenger door, and leaned toward the open space. "You need a ride?" I called. My voice sounded small against the downpour. She tilted her head slightly like she was listening to a sound I couldn't hear. Then she stepped forward. The first thing I noticed was her bare feet. They were so pale they almost glowed against the black mud, and she left faint, dirty water prints as she climbed in. She smelled faintly of wet earth and something metallic, sharp enough to sting the back of my throat. "Thank you," she said softly, voice flat, almost practiced. "No problem," I replied, glancing at her. She was staring straight ahead, not at me, not even at the road. Her hair stuck to her face, but what I could see of her skin looked too smooth, too perfect, like porcelain. "Where you headed?" I asked. "Home." "Where's that?" Her lips barely moved. "I'll tell you when we're close." Something in her tone made me shiver. I put the truck back in gear, easing back onto the wet highway. We drove in silence for several minutes. I tried not to stare, but I couldn't help it. She was bone still, her hands folded over the object she was holding, a small, battered leather book. The cover was dark and slick with water, but it looked old, the kind of old that smelled like attic dust and mildew. Every time lightning lit the cab for a fraction of a second, her face seemed different. The first time, her eyes looked darker. The second time, her mouth was set in a strange half-smile. I told myself it was just the shadows. "You from around here?" I asked, desperate to cut the tension. "Yes," she said after a pause. Then, almost like a warning, "I know these roads." A few more miles passed before she spoke again. "Turn left." I frowned. "There's no road here." She didn't answer, only lifted one pale hand to point. Sure enough, barely visible through the curtain of rain, was a narrow dirt track cutting into the desert. I'd have missed it entirely without her direction. "I don't think this road leads to Ely," I said carefully. "It leads home." I hesitated. My gut screamed at me to keep driving straight, but her voice had this weight to it. Against all logic, I slowed and made the turn. The dirt road was rough, the truck jolting over rocks and potholes. No lights, no houses, just desert and darkness pressing in on all sides. "How much farther?" I asked after what felt like 10 minutes. She didn't answer. When I glanced over, my breath caught. She was gone. The passenger seat was empty. I slammed the brakes, heart pounding so hard I felt it in my teeth. The rain was lighter here, but my skin prickled with cold sweat. I looked around wildly. Nothing but blackness beyond the weak circle of my headlights. Then from behind me, a soft voice. "This is home." I twisted in my seat. She was standing in the road behind the truck, completely dry now, the soaked dress gone, replaced with something older. An antique white gown, yellowed with age. Her hair was loose, floating slightly, though there was no wind. The leather book she'd been holding was open in her hands. She began to whisper something in a language I couldn't recognize, the sound thin and sharp like paper tearing. I tried to start the truck, but the engine only coughed and died. My headlights flickered once and went out. Darkness swallowed everything. The whispering grew louder. My skin crawled as the air turned thick, almost syrupy. My ears popped. I could feel her right outside my door now, though I couldn't see her. Then, cold fingers, ice cold, slid across my cheek. "You brought me back," she breathed. Every instinct told me to run, but my body wouldn't move. I heard the creak of my door opening, felt the rush of colder air. And then, nothing. When I opened my eyes, I was standing on the side of Route 50 in the pouring rain, my truck gone. My clothes were bone dry. The road was empty except for a single, weathered mile marker, 313. Far down the road, in the dim smear of my vision, I saw headlights approaching. A truck slowed, and a man inside leaned over, popped the passenger door, and called out to me. "You need a ride?" I smiled and stepped forward. I was somewhere between Amarillo and nowhere when the storm rolled in. The sky went from bruised purple to black in minutes, the kind of black that swallows headlights whole. Rain hammered the windshield so hard it felt like someone was throwing gravel at me, and the wipers were useless, just smearing the water into shifting shapes. My GPS had gone dead 15 miles back, and the last sign I saw had only read US 287 North, with no hint of how far the next town might be. I'd been driving since early afternoon, pushing through the flat, endless Texas plains with nothing but truck stop coffee keeping me upright. It was supposed to be a straight, quiet run up to Colorado, just me and the road. That's when I saw him. He was standing on the shoulder just beyond the reach of the high beams, a tall, thin silhouette against the curtain of rain. His arm was up, thumb out in the old hitchhiker gesture you almost never see anymore. I should have kept going. Every survival instinct whispered it. Keep your eyes forward. Don't stop. Not out here. But I slowed. I told myself it was because of the storm, because nobody should be stuck out there in weather like that. But in the back of my mind was something else. Curiosity. The closer I got, the stranger he looked. He was wearing an old brown trench coat that hung limp and waterlogged, the brim of a fedora low over his face. The water ran off him in steady rivulets pooling at his boots. I pulled onto the shoulder, hazard lights blinking against the black. My tires hissed in the wet gravel. The man stepped forward, slow and deliberate, and when he reached the passenger door, he leaned down and looked in. His face was shadowed, but his mouth curled into something that might have been a smile. "Headed north?" he asked. His voice was deep but muffled, like he was speaking from behind a wall. "Yeah," I said. "Hop in." He slid into the seat without another word, water dripping onto the floor mats. He smelled faintly of damp earth, like the inside of a root cellar. I pulled back onto the road, my eyes flicking between him and the highway. "Where you headed?" I asked. "Up the road a ways," he said. Not exactly helpful. The storm seemed to worsen the moment he got in. The wind howled against the cab, and the rain was a constant roar on always outside.